on June 10th, Hitler and Mussolini made a pact. They became allies. And the Allies, America and England, started bombing Milan because of the pact. My mother was 9 months pregnant. She went down into the cellar because it was a blitz bombing, and I was born. My mother got pregnant after having lost 5 or 6 pregnancies, and she was able to carry me to 9 months, and I was born in 1940. My parents were living in Milan, and when I was 9 months old, the authorities decided to pick up all the foreign Jews who were living in Milan and sent them to an internment camp.
They were brought to Potenza, a little town in Italy.
An internment camp was like 20 houses where only we were living together. The police would check that we stayed there, and there was nowhere you could go. And my dad, they couldn't find him for a while. When they finally found him, they sent him to jail. When my dad was let out of jail, they sent him to the only concentration camp in Italy called Ferramonte. My dad was able to get some communications to his wife, my mother, in Potenza. And then my mother went into labor, and she had a baby boy, and the baby had difficulty breathing.
The people that were in the hospital would not help the baby boy because it was another Jewish boy, and they didn't want any more Jews in Italy.
But because of the baby's death, my dad was somehow able to convince the authorities. And the Italians were very much better than the Germans. It would never have happened in Germany that my dad was released from that camp.
My grandfather spoke perfect Italian. He was very charismatic, and he was able to either bribe the guards or somehow he was able to leave the concentration camp and get together with his family in Potenza.
And sent to the internment camp with my mother, which is where they spent the war years.
I remember the story that my grandmother told me that she had an operation on the kitchen table and she almost died.
She got a very bad infection. My grandfather had to go to the closest American Army base and plead and beg for penicillin to help her, and he was able to get some, and my mother was able to survive.
You know, they couldn't work, they couldn't do anything, but they were contained in that internment camp. Now, the object of the internment camp, obviously, was to send the Jews to the camps. And sporadically, the Italians were forced by the Germans to round up all the Jews that they had and to transport them. But my parents said they were on the trains twice, and the trains didn't work. The Italians were notoriously bad at that type of thing, and so they were taken off the trains.
Every time they went to the trains to go to whatever concentration camp they were going to, they knew they weren't coming home. They would leave my mother with one of the policemen that they were friendly with in Italy to take care of my mother. And being a parent and giving your child away is just hard to comprehend.
One thing I remember my mom telling us was that when they were in Potenza, they were put on the trains a number of times to be deported to Auschwitz. And it always ended up that something happened, the trains broke down or there was a typhoid epidemic, and for some reason the trains never left the town and they were put back into the internment camp. And a year after I got married, my parents took my husband and I to Italy, and I remember being in the airport and it was just chaos all'Italia, just very disorganized. And normally that would really bother her, but she kept saying, this is why we survived, because the Italians were not as organized as the Germans were, and this chaos was the reason why we're here. And it doesn't bother me. It's okay. Let them do whatever they need to do. And that was one of the reasons why they never were sent to Auschwitz.
In 1943, that's when the deportations really started seriously in Italy, because the Germans came in.
The people of Potenza knew that the Germans were coming by, and they dispersed all the Jews. There's probably 250 to 300 people living in Potenza to little towns all throughout this area of Italy.
My parents were sent to a very small town called Tito. We were in Tito for many months. The German troops actually came through, but they hid us in the basements, and that's how we survived the war.
Headlines bring the people of the United Nations the most sensational news of the war, the surrender of Italy.
After the Germans were defeated, because the Canadians came up the boot, and they were the ones who liberated us. That was the first time I ever saw chocolate or an orange or gum. We were then back in Potenza, but we were free. And my parents then found out that their whole families had been killed. My father was one of 9. Only 3 survived the war. My father and 2 others. One brother survived the war in the woods of France with 2 children. My father's other brother came to America in the early years, and he did not have any wartime experiences. But in 1951, he came to Italy to visit us, and that was the first time that I had ever met family. And that's why family is very important to me. That was the first time. I never had a grandparent, I never had an aunt, an uncle, cousin. Anyway, they came, my uncle and his family came to Italy, and he convinced us to come to America.
Our grandparents were always sharing about their lives during the war, about their family that they lost. They wanted us to pass it on and pass on the traditions that they learned from their families.
When I first heard my grandma's story, I felt sad and scared for them because I could never imagine myself being through all of that she did.
Being a child of a survivor, I always knew who I was and where I came from, my family history. It's just a part of me.
Knowing how difficult my grandmother's life was growing up makes me appreciate life more.
They grew up, had to go through what they went through and move on and raise their families, never forgetting, but moving forward and not just living in the past.
My mom always says that she never felt scared, that my grandmother always sang to her, and my grandparents always made them feel safe no matter where they were, hiding in a barn or in a house with other Jewish people or going to the trains, that they would just always sing to them. Music was a big part of their lives, and that they never felt scared. I think it's important to never forget, to record these stories and to remember what happened, and to never sit by and watch something that you think is wrong. Education.
Hope.
Survival.
Heritage.
History.
Tolerance.
Remember, never forget. This is the song that my mom used to sing to me when we went, when they were bombing us, especially in the little town of Tito. We used to go down to the basement of the farmhouse, and it was dark, and we were scared, and she used to sing to us, and it was very comforting. And now I sing it to my grandchildren to help them go to sleep. Auf dem Pripyat brennt der Feuer, und in Stieb ist heiß.